As Sylvia just mentioned, is Sean Cranbury. I work a lot in digital publishing. I do a lot of work in social media communication strategies for organizations, predominantly in the healthcare field, but also in the publishing and specifically book publishing sector. What's left of it? You can still call it a sector. So a lot of the similar challenges to what the magazine industry obviously is facing as well, right? I also work with W2. I'm a board member of the organization that is happy to have you here tonight. W2 is a nonprofit social enterprise in the downtown east side, and it's really good to have these kinds of discussions within our walls. So thank you very much for asking, for allowing us to welcome you here. So let's start with the people we're going to be talking with tonight. On the far end, our friend Nick Jones is here. Nick has a fabulous bio. A consultant focused on the use of digital strategies and tactics to serve users and achieve business objectives. Nick holds an MBA in strategy, MPA in public policy, and a BFA in oil painting. Something that you don't often see in these bios, and that's awesome.
I've been diagnosed with ADD.
Yeah, not enough information coming in for Nick. His prior work experience includes time at CBC Radio Canada, Chapters.ca, New Run, Bell Express View, TELUS Credit Union Central of BC. Nick is also a public speaker, author, educator, and digital artist. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
Not to be out-nicked, Nikolay Malyarov is here. Has been with Newspaper Direct since 2003. As VP of Publishing, he is responsible for growing Newspaper Direct's worldwide community of newspaper and magazine publishing partners, focusing on solutions which help them expand their market reach and increase revenues. He is the VP of Legal Affairs and provides counsel on all legal aspects, which is obviously an important part of the transition. Kate Reid is the head writer at Thinking Ape, a mobile game startup in Gastown. I'm just going to cut this off. You guys have probably read all this stuff already. And of course, Christine Pilkington is here. And Christine is the CEO of Crisp Media. So welcome to everybody. Now, what we're hoping for is that this discussion is not only going to be driven by our folks here, but that you feel free and welcome to put your hand up or blurt out some questions or join the conversation. Because this really is about helping anyone who has a question or a concern or an idea to flesh it out and find some solutions, perhaps. One of the things I wanted to start off with is, in the digital transition that we're experiencing, how important and how should people in this room, how important is social media, and can you afford to ignore it? Nikolay, do you want to start with that?
It's funny because so many people are now using various social media tools, and it's our company comes from obviously from a newspaper background. It has the name of the company, and so we've been observing. We've been observing how newspaper publishers are using social media and propagating their content. I mean, the one issue that all publishers are facing is to how to monetize content. And with so many users are now relying on social media platforms to get most of their content, it's kind of hard to monetize that. And so none of the platforms are most used these days. Neither Facebook nor Twitter nor Pinterest really provide these monetization opportunities. So as much as it is important to get the brand out through social media, it's still not clear as to how publishers can use these platforms to monetize the content that they're producing. As much as you're bringing the users back to your sites, perhaps, it's still not the best vehicle to monetize these users, to actually get them to stay with your brand. So many newspaper publishers now experimenting with social readers, social reader apps on Facebook. But again, as much as they've seen the uptake in the first month or so, and they saw the traffic, particularly for the bigger brands like the Washington Post or the Guardian, as soon as Facebook saw that, they tweaked the rules, and so the traffic drops. So it's, I mean, one word, yes, it's important to use social media platforms, but on the other hand, the question is, where's the money?
Sure.
Yeah,
and the other thing is say with an app or a newfangled thing, whatever it is that happens, there's an immediate spike, because, and that's great, because anything more than zero is good, right? But how do you maintain that over time, right? Christine, you mentioned in some of the questions that I asked that you have experience with Facebook, some social media channels, and then figuring out some monetization aspects. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So my company is Chris Media, and we publish networks of online magazines that are hyper-local. So I actually have two networks, but one of them that I can talk about mostly is this one called City Mom Now. We're national. So I've got a site here that we're best known for, which is vancouvermom.ca.
Right.
The majority of our advertisers are small businesses who are like just regular coffee shops, regular people running these things who see an opportunity to get their stuff out there online. And they're, quite frankly, they're looking at a publication like ours because they see it as being kind of the future. And so in terms of monetizing social media, when I package out my ad packages for them, I do include Twitter and Facebook as part of that that sponsorship package,
right,
or advertising package rather. And I think because they see us actively engaging with them on messages that they want to get out there, there's more value, and that's how we're attracting more advertisers.
Right, right. And are you capable of quantifying what that means?
In what way?
Like, would you be able to say that by mentioning or including Facebook or the social media within the package that has resulted in greater?
I think it's more. What I really emphasize with the advertisers is that we actually have gone to deliver high customer service to them.
Right.
So by helping them spread the word through social media and through Twitter, that's one way we're helping them do that. It's hard for me to really say specifically because I've included this one tweet in here. Our ad revenues have increased by X amount.
Well, if you did have that, then you'd be a very rich person. Right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Actually pinpoint.
Yeah. So, but I do know by offering a whole package, not just banners or email or whatever the case may be, they see value in that.
Yeah. Right. Nick, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, so social media is a tactic, right? For me, it's all a strategy. I mean, you read my bio there. It's all about the strategies. What are you trying to achieve, and then what are the tools to achieve it? There's no question. I mean, there's like 500-600 billion people on Facebook. You got to think a few of them will read your stuff, right? There's a billion trillion tweets a day. You can't even count them. There's clearly activity going on in here, but it is extremely complex. It is extremely fragmented and personal. So, as a tactic, if you can make it work, it's fabulous. It'll drive traffic up the wazoo to your site or to your property or to your content to a mobile device. It's just understanding how to do that and making sure you know what you're trying to achieve and then the right tactic. And I'll give you an example. Pinterest, big new social media. Everybody's sending pictures. It's like very cool. People in magazine, in the publishing industry, in the retail industry, got to get my pictures up on Pinterest. So I'm working actually with a client right now. And they put up a Pinterest, a pin it button on their website, and they started, trying to get people to put the images up on Pinterest. Their traffic dropped off.
Whoa. And
these guys are good. They do A/B variant testing. So they take basically half the traffic to their site, they push it towards the version of the website with the pin on it, and the other is just left alone. And the one that was left alone, traffic continued as normal. The other one, traffic drops off. It's like, oh my God, what's gone wrong? Nick, we're going to fire you, we're going to sue you, our traffic's going down the hall. Like, whoa, crazy talk. And then I blame someone else in the room. But so that's the important thing, always blame someone else in the room. But what was interesting, so what was happening was people were going, Pinterest, I've heard about it, that's cool. They go to Pinterest, all these cool photos. Suddenly, wherever they were is like long gone. They don't even remember what they were looking at. They're looking at cool pictures of bicycles and mountains and dogs and dead whales on the beach.
And Tom Selleck.
And Tom Selleck, you know, and Tom Selleck with a dead whale on the beach. Yeah, it's like any combination there, right? So it's a tactic, and it's very powerful. But if you do it the wrong way, it'll really hurt you. So think of it as a tactic. What are you trying to achieve? And then very carefully, through experts, through your own research, through other examples, make sure and do it in a test, because it can go wrong, as we demonstrated it to my client, that it can actually go wrong. So that would be my one comment. Absolutely, everyone and their brother, and there's even dogs on Facebook. They have Facebook, it's crazy stuff. They're out there, but getting to them in a smart way and in a way that drives business the way you want it driven is not easy.
Yeah, I think that it's important that we were having a discussion, or I eavesdropped on a discussion with you, having with a gentleman here about Facebook, and for sure, for many people, it's not going to be a place that has any relevance for you or your business, right? But if you listen to some people talk, you've got to be on Facebook. You've absolutely got to put the time in. I don't think you have to. You just need to be smart about whether or not that's where your audience is.
And the thought I would leave with you is, before you play in this space, which is extremely volatile, go and look at some great examples. Go to Google and rate Facebook campaigns. There are some brilliant ones that have driven traffic by the billions to sites and met business objectives. But they were thought out in extreme detail and tested, and probably didn't work the first time. Right? So go cautiously. It's a big, scary place.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that. The internet is wonderful.
So, Kate, with your... Oh, do we have a question? I'm sorry. Right over here.
I have a question for Christine. It's kind of two parts. One, when you talk about packaging social media into your advertising, are your Twitter accounts editorial, or are they advertising? And if they're a combination of both, how much control do you give the advertisers over what you're posting about that?
I give them, both are mostly editorial. So there's a very small, I would say, one post a week, depending on how much volume I have for the advertising, that would be actually sponsored. It's very clearly marked as a sponsored mention. And they have almost no control. They can suggest what they would like me to say in it, but because it's social media and because it's sponsored, we decide what we want to say on it. I do want to add, so we monetize our content. So our content is monetized through page views, and the more page views we get, it's the classic magazine way of monetizing content, right? So the more page views we get, the more revenues we can generate. And because we monetize our email list, the more subscribers we get, the more revenue we can generate, right? And we went through just very recently an user acquisition campaign where all I did was pay, I think it was like $200 or something. I was just trying to answer your question about monetization. Maybe even less, right? On a Facebook campaign that drove people to a landing page, and the landing page said, like us, just like us, right? And so people would like us. And then after that, it actually flipped to a newsletter opt-in page right away. And I think I paid maybe $1.50 per user I acquired through that way, right? So you can, and so then if you work it out where you're like, okay, how much is each email address worth to me over the course of a year? You can very well see whether or not social media in that context is working for you from revenue perspective.
Great. Was there a second part to that question?
No, that was
That was it? And, sir?
I have just something to say and maybe get some feedback.
Sure, contribute.
Social media messaging and strategy, people want to be entertained. In fact, people demand to be entertained. Take, for example, Hollywood celebrities or pop stars who really have nothing else to offer except what they're good at are so hugely successful on Twitter. Why? Because their lives are entertaining. And they live their lives through their Twitter profile. So people find it very entertaining. So I'm wondering, for publications or for your businesses, do you ever get into those kind of entertainment strategies with your social media? Or is it really more repurposing your editorial content?
Do you want to start with that, Kate?
Yeah, at my company, Thinking Ape, we're primarily like a social games company, but one thing we're really good about is taking Instagram photos of just us at lunch really putting like a face to who we are and getting people to know our company that way. Putting like little jokes, little pithy comments, not necessarily going, check out our game. Like, people hate that. It just, it drives them away. I just find the more that you communicate with people, the more you like talk back with people, that is really what keeps them interested in what you're doing. So I think, yeah, definitely, like the more that you put a face to things, the better a conversation that you'll have with people, and the more they'll be like emotionally attached to what you're presenting.
Yeah, I think that, not everybody is Justin Timberlake, right? And it would be difficult to try and be Justin Timberlake on Twitter unless you are Justin Timberlake. So I think that what you have to do is, like, engagement is the word that gets used all the time, every day, where people are like, oh, how much engagement do you have in your social media, blah, blah, blah. I think that that's how you do it, through talking with people and the serendipitous moment of connection on the social media, and that a big part of it is not selling. You're not selling, right? You're just kind of alluding by association to the thing that you also do, which is in the background somewhere, or a link out. Anybody else?
So let me throw out a thought for you, when you think about your customer, and to this gentleman's point in the back corner, that some may just be wanting entertainment, right? That's the value they get out of the stream, the flow of content that they're getting, the information they're getting. But for the majority of us, there's a hierarchical tree of value of what they get. At the core is critical information. News, kids' school, traffic, weather. These are critical things, right? If you don't get those, your day can go really wrong. Next level down is highly useful, maybe somewhat optional, really interesting things that are happening, sales, useful information, etc. Even lower than that is probably entertainment, right? Because it's highly optional. I need critical first, I need optionally important second, and entertainment can come or go. So if you're thinking about building a really strong value-based relationship, and unless you specifically are about entertainment content, right? Because then that's what you do. Otherwise, think about that hierarchy of value and how you have to have the A before you get to the B if you really want to build that relationship. If you're all third-tier optional value content information, people come and go. They'll decide to or not to look at you, right? You have to have that continuous stream of high value to the customer on an ongoing basis to have a real connection. That is the challenge, and in particular in social media, it's a tsunami of content. Like I mean, it'll wash over you in a heartbeat, and you start to hone down what you look at. You adjust the Twitter feeds that you look at. You friend
Unfollow,
unfriend people. Don't get me. Ask me later about the person I unfriended and turned into like a social stalking incident. It's quite scary. But so do that carefully. Do the unfriending very carefully. Maybe just ignore them at first, but it's really about going through that hierarchy of value. If you can't establish high value, you have a danger of becoming irrelevant. That is the only thing I would caution around between entertaining content and high value content.
Yeah. One of the things I say often to groups like this is that these channels are filters, right? If you don't want to know what Shaquille O'Neal had for lunch, you don't follow Shaquille O'Neal. Very simple. The Twitter feed or any of the feeds, really, it's user created. So you have the option of following or paying attention to or listening in on these conversations. And there are a billion people out there or more who have nothing relevant to say and never will. And that's okay, because you don't have to listen to them. Right? So remember, the power really is with you. Anybody, Nick, do you want to speak to this?
I mean, we don't publish our own content. We publish somebody else's content, and that's probably a difference in what most people on the panel do here. We work with X number of newspapers and magazines, and we just publish them digitally. So for us, it's very hard to present to potential users of the service, subscribers of the service, that, hey, you know what, we have something of interest to you individually. So our marketing team, what they've been doing lately is they were trying to find stories that are hot stories virtually universally, not necessarily a top Canadian story, a top BC story, but the top sort of worldwide story. The manhunt for the killer, the Montreal porn speculator. That was a story that resonated well around the world. So what they would do is they would find a very nice visual from either a newspaper or magazine that's part of the service, and they would put a link to the article with a great visual that's associated with it. So that would drive the users back to the article, so that it exposes the service to them. It exposes the content. It's available for free, that particular article. There are related articles from other publications, so the users can see those. And that's how you speak to something that is of interest to the group you're appealing to at that point in time. Because there is no point, obviously, in rehashing something that is long gone. So that's been our strategy. It has worked fairly well, because we obviously try to get users in and then invite them to subscribe to the service. They can get access to the rest of the content, and it's been working fairly well. But to your point, there is a concern, over the last month or so, particularly with the whole Facebook IPO fiasco, of a certain fatigue that's on the rise amongst the users of social networks, and so social media networks, and so it's important to not overload the users with that, because at some point you're going to stop unfriending and you just stop using the service completely. So that you have to be careful. There is a balance there that you also have to respect. These are sort of unwritten rules of the game.
Do you want to add anything to that, Fred?
I mean, I was just listening to what Sean said, and ultimately, if you produce good content is always king, right? So if you have really good content, and you happen to find the people who really want that content, right? And keep producing content for that niche, you'll be successful, whether it be online through social media or right?
Yep. I think, is there a question?
I'm just wondering, any thoughts on using YouTube to enhance your content?
Yes.
Good question. Yeah. Christine, go ahead.
I just say yes.
Just yes. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. It's just
what we're doing here.
Yeah. Is that what we're doing here? YouTubing?
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great way to take a story that has been said one way and rehashing it in different ways and attracting different people. I mean, I think YouTube is the second biggest search engine out there after Google, main search Google. So people will find you, and it's just another way to attract new readers or existing readers to your content.
Yeah, it's that serendipitous effect, right? And what Nick was saying before about losing people to Pinterest. So you're on, you're in this, you have them captured, and you're like, oh great, they're checking out my site. Oh no, they're on Pinterest, and they're gone forever, right? So the search is so important, and YouTube is a hugely powerful tool. I know people who will just upload audio, for example, and then just a static picture for a 20-minute conversation. But it's a search engine, right? You tag things properly, it comes up in searches. You tag for discoverability, those kinds of things. What about bathing it, or not bathing it, Thinking Ape?
Yeah, I'm not so much involved in like the marketing side of it.
Right.
I think really we just have a couple of videos of the founders kind of going around to schools to recruit and that kind of thing. I think we're right now just also kind of building up our website as well. It's basically just a recruitment kind of thing for us. So yeah, not really like YouTube kind of stuff.
Are you seeing it, Nikolay, with a lot of the newspapers that you're working with?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because the newspapers, with the rise of interest in videos and with the accessibility of videos on tablets, newspapers have been losing a great battle not to free content that's published elsewhere, but to video content. And video content is generally owned by TV stations that may operate in the same area. So if we look at the local news, surely looking at the video story of a particular local news story is more interested in reading it in the local newspaper. And so I think the American publishers have done it better in terms of partnering with local TV stations, where they would share content and actually produce portals that aggregate content from both newspaper journalists as well as TV journalists, and there's video content to go with it, and you can enhance that. There is but not everybody does it this way. The one thing that some of the publishers that we work with have been doing is produce a digital edition of their publication, and they would obviously enrich it with additional content. So if I'm reading a newspaper, to be able to access a video story, as I'm very much immersed in reading the publication, not being taken onto YouTube or anything else, is definitely of value, right? And it's something that they were able to monetize. One such publisher is in Spain. It's a national newspaper, and what they would do is they produce a midnight edition, which serves as a preview of tomorrow morning's edition. Never appears in print, does look and feel very much like a print edition. It's published on across all the tablets. Even on the front page, there is a story, there is a video that would get attached to a headline story, where it would be an editor or a sub-editor that would talk for about 45-50 seconds, nothing long, that would give a preview of what the story is all about. And he's holding up, or she's holding up, a printout of the front page, so you make an immediate visual connection that, hey, you know what, this is all related. And then, yes, it does in the eyes of the reader, it does add the value to the product, and they're prepared to pay money for it. But that's the whole video element to newspaper and magazine publishers has been very interesting, particularly to newspaper publishers, because of the immediacy of the content that they still have to present.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about the person, the editor, or talking and holding a copy or whatever, is in that 45 seconds, the value there is the relationship, right? It's almost like you know him, you trust him or her, and there they are talking to you about the news, holding it. So it isn't just a blank screen with text, some dissociated images, right? Nick, thoughts on YouTube?
It's always fun when one of the panel members says I'm crazy, so I'm going to do that for you. You have to get out of the mindset of being a newspaper publisher, and magazine publisher, and TV station. It's totally irrelevant. This is my TV station. This is my newspaper, my magazine. It's my computer. It's my email device. I do voice communication with this. What's important to me is the brand. Wired produces great content. I don't think that it's a magazine. It's a content producer brand that I trust and I consume. Wired magazine embeds videos into it. So they don't say, oh, we're a magazine publisher, we don't do videos. They say, this story, this content I'm creating for Nick would be enhanced by doing video, and they figure it out. Yeah. Retailers today, people who make stuff, things, are putting videos on YouTube by the hundreds of thousands. Because when you buy something, where do you go? You go check out a review on YouTube. So I'm trying to shock you, I'm trying to scare you, maybe be a bit harsh with you. Think of yourself as a unique content producer, a unique value add, and use whatever method is best for communicating that to your customer. And I warn you, if you don't actually broaden your thinking, you will fade into irrelevance. Because one of your competitors will start including video. They may switch totally to video. Wired may become a video channel, because that's the best way to deliver content. I doubt it. I don't think that's the case, but probably the combinations. Some things are better read. I still read. It's going to be sad when, I don't read on paper anymore, but I read still. I love watching video. I love listening to podcasts. It's a different way of delivering the content. You have to shake the idea that I'm a newspaper, I'm a magazine. I was at CBC. I have a dent in my forehead from where I was hitting the desk with my forehead, because I'd be like, it's not TV, it's video. This is not a TV, it's a video machine. I watch videos on this. And they'd be like, well, it's TV, Like, no, it's video. People don't say, oh, I'm going to watch some TV. They go, hey, it's a CBC video. That's what they watch. So you really have to think about, divorce yourself from the old language. Think about the methods of delivering your story, the content you want to deliver, and optimize it for your customer. There you go.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned Wired. I immediately went to TED. Right, so the TED Talks, everyone is probably familiar with those. So what's interesting about them is they bring together real life moments, people in the same room who get to think and talk to each other and interact and have something interesting to say, but they really share that with, they are essentially a magazine of ideas that uses the web and video as their platform. In the old days, they would have used paper and ink, but here they actually bring people together and then they share that, and so many of those videos go viral, right?
And actually, I'll take one. They're still used for paper and ink.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Totally. When I go camping and there's no connectivity, which is very scary for Nick, no connectivity is a scary place for me, I use a paper-based map, and it works. It works really well. It's even waterproof, and the water dribbles off, and I'm like, wow, this paper template is pretty cool, right? This is a doorstop when I'm in the forest, right?
Yeah.
So it still works. The paper is still a viable option in the right location. It's just, think of all of them as an option.
Yeah, yeah, very inclusive. So let's move on to some acronyms.
I said that because I felt like I was pooing on everybody's page.
People, is anybody in this room not familiar with the acronyms UX or IX? Yeah, that's good. UX. Kate, do you want to talk a little bit about UX?
UX is basically like user experience. So when you're delivering this content, is it getting to people the right way? Is it getting to them in the most accessible way? Are you using all of the resources that you have at your, are you using them? Are you making them awesome? Basically, like, when I moved from working at like a literary magazine and freelancing for web, and now I'm working for video games, it was kind of like a giant shift. And suddenly I have to think about user interfaces and how can I cram this big idea that is like a paragraph of text into like three words, one sentence. So really looking at the experience that someone who's looking at the screen or whatever else, well, how do they feel, and what can you do to deliver your content in the best way?
Yeah, yeah. So we're having a bit of a disturbance here in the back. Yeah, why don't you guys come on up front? So I was gonna
sit in the front row.
I was gonna preface that whole getting into the user experience with the idea that things are kind of backwards. There's been a flip somewhere in the past 5 years when considering how to create content.
Now you can't get out. Wow.
Yep, there we go. We're locked in. We're locked in now. Yeah, no, it'll be fine.
It's funny because if you would have walked in and it wasn't stuck.
Yeah, it was fine. So everything is flipped, right? Now we're thinking about things like, what does the user want? We're sourcing all kinds of information at the beginning of thinking about the content that we're actually going to share and put into things. One interesting thing that I read about today on a website called GigaOM. If you're not reading a website called GigaOM, I would highly recommend it. A guy named Matthew Ingram, whom many of us probably are familiar with, used to write for the Globe and Mail as their technology editor, now writes for GigaOM. And he talks all the time about the challenges of the newspaper and magazine industries. He mentioned today that our friends at the Huffington Post have gone the other way. They started as a digital native product, a website essentially, and we all know about their ability or willingness to pay writers. The ability to pay, it's the willingness to pay actually, which is more important. But what they've done is they have created an app. Is that correct, Nick? Have you heard about this story where they've actually gone and instead of being a web-based, they've actually created a weekly magazine-style app?
Wow, I didn't hear that.
Yeah. So I think that they just announced it today.
But it's still an app, right?
Yeah.
So it's still cool.
Well, it's still cool, but the content isn't. But it's curated content that could be a week old.
Yeah.
Right. I think that they launched it today, and one of their lead stories was the story about the British Prime Minister who left his daughter at a pub or something. So like 3 days ago. Right. Anyway, so things have kind of flipped backwards, and we're instead of determining content and then giving it to the audience, you're actually mining the audience in the beginning to determine the content. Do you have experience with that?
Yeah,
Christine?
so we've thought really deeply about who our readers are.
Yeah.
So that's where it really starts, is you have to think about who is actually coming to your site
Yeah.
and why they're coming to your site. And I don't mean just demographics, right? 35-year-old woman who
Facebook
thinks
Insights.
that,
Facebook
right?
Insights.
Yeah, it's not about that. Like we've thought, and these are made up things, you can make them up, right? Based upon a little bit about information that you might have already about your readers, but also based upon what kind of content you want to produce for these readers.
Yeah.
And so, our one persona might be this crunchy granola mom living on Commercial Drive who bikes everywhere and blah, blah, blah. And you can come up with, I wouldn't come up with a lot, maybe have one primary one and maybe 2 additional ones to support what kind of stories you might produce for that person. But To your user experience question, beyond just coming up with the content, I was thinking, how can I keep these people engaged and coming back over and over and over again? Like, you know, because I just produce one story a day. So, and it's really now going to extend into producing an app where I can syndicate my content, but support it with something else that might make sense for that audience, and I'm still fleshing all of that out. But it is just another platform for me to serve that user, but also, you know, make more use and syndicate the content that I'm already producing.
Have you ever been surprised by who your user is? For instance, you know, you're producing content, you're like, oh, I know,
of course,
you know, I live in Commercial Drive, I know your audience.
Right.
They live right beside. And so, you know, but have you ever been there where you're like really paying attention to who your audience is, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, I didn't know.
So what, as I said earlier, we are hyper-local. Like, we write content very specifically for Yaletown moms, Main Street kids, like really targeted, targeted neighborhoods. And so, to my surprise, we had this humongous following in the Valley. Like, why? Why are you guys in Langley reading us? Like, how is that? And it's, you know, what I've determined, it has a lot to do with yearning, like wanting to live in the city. Right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, right, this idea of I want to live in the city, I want to keep in touch with what's going on. And so, yeah, that was a big surprise. But now I know, and it means that we're going to still do what we're doing, but when I have an advertiser coming in who is out in South Surrey, it's still relevant to them, even though we're only writing in, you know, for Main Street.
Yeah. Did you, one more question along that thread, how did you determine that, and did you actually connect with anybody in the Valley where you're like...
Part of it is Facebook Insights, because you can see where people say that they live. Yeah. I mean, in our case, it's a bit iffy, because even though you might live in Burnaby, you might still say you live in Vancouver. Yeah, right? That's right. So, but there is a tremendous, I think people, if they live in the Valley, they will say they live in Abbotsford or they live in Langley. And yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I think it's great. Anybody, yeah.
What if the target audience knows, that catches on that it's actually popular out in the Valley? Would that
I don't know.
The popularity?
You know, I don't actually think it matters to them at all, right? Yeah. I mean, so I was talking about our personas, and one persona we've identified is this mom who's moved out to maybe Port Moody, right? And she maybe had a house in Yaletown, or a condo in Yaletown, and after having her second child, she moved out to the suburbs, and she's still hip and cool, but you know, and she still goes downtown, but maybe not as often as she wants to. So I don't know if moms in Main Street would be offended by that, right? Right. Yeah. No? Yeah.
Another question?
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely. Next up.
So, just FYI, I used to work at Southern newspapers, and I worked at Chapters, paper-based books, which was really cool. And we actually, I remember seeing studies, and I think everything I saw there applies today to these devices, which I obviously covet and love so much. There's different modes, right, of consumption. You have to think about the modes of consumption. There's the tweet, 144 characters. It's the headline, right? That's a cool headline. That's not it. I'm interested or not, and you kind of surf through it, and you kind of go, those were interesting. That's surfing mode. That's trying to find interesting stuff. Consumption mode is then actually an extension of that. If you go beyond surfing, right? You find the interesting headline. Now I want to drill deeper. I want to eat some more. That was tasty. I want a bigger meal. I want to read the deep, long-form content. Often those happen at different times. That 10 minutes before work, got a coffee in there, checking Twitter, looking for interesting headlines. I don't have time to read the whole story. I got to get to work. I got calls, stuff to do. I want to read it later. There's consumption time. That's a different period, a different activity. That's usually me with my buddy, the iPad, sitting back on the couch, kids are in bed, got a nice drink. My wife and I are watching some TV. I'm checking out some articles. That's a different time, right? In the world of these multiple digital devices, small screen, mid-sized screen, computer screen, TV screen, other screens, traditional print, we were talking about UX, it's actually UB, user behavior. It's understanding user behavior. When is the surf moment and when is the consumption moment? And there's different names for it, but you guys develop great long-form content probably, and you find a really great short-form title to catch the eye, to drive people into the long form. What are the options? How do you understand their behavior so you can give them options for later consumption, especially in a digital world when the tsunami of content is constantly washing over the person? There's things like, there's something called Instapaper, and it's just basically if the content is on a site where it says read later on Instapaper, you hit a button, it shoots that article over to Instapaper. It's like a bucket. So I'm all day long, I'm throwing stuff in my bucket because tonight I'm going to go back to my bucket and read the stuff I want to read about. So think about Instapaper, think about Evernote. There's all sorts of different services, all sorts of different ways that you can let people, you can even simply put, like this article, click this button and I'll send you an email. Right? So in their inbox, there's 10 emails from your site or your service that says, here's the 10 articles you wanted to read about. Then they click on the article, pull up a browser or an app or whatever and read it, right? So how do you give them the chance to go from surf, which is acquisition, to consumption, which is when they actually read the content? That's the real nut of it. UX is the science and some say black art of understanding the digital interface and tweaking the buttons and the content and the text and the colors and smiley face and take the Pinterest button out, etc. like that. That's UX. UB is understanding how they're using it. That's the real sweet spot. You understand that, then you can put in the tactics to let them actually consume later, do the surfing now, and so forth. I think that's the hardest thing. It's what mode are they in? How can you give them a chance to sort of switch modes or retain the link over time because of this tsunami of content that's raining down?
Do you have any, I mean, we could talk about UB for ever and ever and ever, right? So just a couple of ideas. How does one determine any kind of behavior? For somebody who's half a world away and you know, like neglecting their work.
There are, you think there's a tsunami of content raining down on you. We are awash in data.
Yeah.
Every digital movement that you make, every headline you look at, page you surf, an email that you, like you don't even want to know, it's kind of creepy how much, you know, people like, there's something called remarketing, right? If you're on one site, you go to another site, you'll suddenly see an ad saying, hey, I could give you a deal on what you were just looking at, and they'll show you the exact shirt that you were looking at on the other site. Like creepy creepiness, but you wanted the shirt, so you take the deal and everything's okay, right? We are awash in data. You need to find the right experts who know Google Analytics, who can pull user behavior data, who can look at logs from your website and your mobile devices and parse them out. You can actually start building maps. I'm working with an entrepreneur right now who has a startup, and we are getting insights through this data into the behavior of people on his site where he's like, that can't be right. This is an error. These idiots you've hired to surf through this data, they don't know what you're talking about. And yet the data shows that people are behaving differently in his site than he ever thought they would.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is insightful. So he's actually now begrudgingly, he's a bit grumpy about it, but he's adjusting the site. And it's actually working. People are going, hey, thumbs up. Somehow you figured out that we want to go here, you made us go there before, now we're going here directly. That is what I wanted. You have to get access to, and the expertise to actually, and I'm not an expert at this, there are people very mystical, they wear robes and have wands and stuff, but they look at the data and they figure it out and they can come back and say, you know, it looks like this is what's happening. And who knew that moms in the valley are reading the magazine from Kitsilano, right? That's great data analysis that jumps out at you and says, wow, there's a market. We should advertise in the valley, right? There's the target market. Yeah. And that goes for publications, games, whatever.
Yeah. And that's the important part is over time, right?
Yes.
You need to, you know, start, and then you need to graph it over time.
Yes. And that's the other
It's not going to be there tomorrow afternoon. You're not going to have all these insights tomorrow if you're just starting today.
And
right?
whatever insight you get today may be irrelevant tomorrow,
right.
Because competitor comes out, new product comes out, they launch a new iPad, there's a bigger iPhone, whatever. The world
Facebook changes
right?
policy.
And suddenly those customers switch over to someone else. It's something you do once, you understand, and you constantly update, and you're reviewing every month, and you're keeping track of it.
So let's talk about something crazy, and I think Nikolay, you'll be able to speak to the craziness of this. Paywalls. Speaking of monetizing content, I just spent 15 or 20 minutes on the Globe. I go to the Globe all the time. It's really where I get most of my standard news. And I did because the Globe is thinking about rolling out a paywall in the fall, and they wanted to take 20 minutes of my time to go through this questionnaire about what I would prefer as a user. So I did it. So more, you know, the web is a problem because it's very difficult to monetize content on the best day. Newspapers are obviously, and some magazines are trying to figure out ways where they can get money up front from people and then give them services as a result. Nick, what do you see from your you're working very closely with newspapers. What do you see in that space, and do you think it's a wise move, or is it good for some and not for everybody?
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Can you open a door?
Yeah.
Toasty hot.
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt.
Before we get to the paywalls,
Sure,
just
yeah,
add
yeah,
something
absolutely.
To understanding user behavior, because I think it ties very well to the whole paywall conversation as to, because users will pay for something that is of value to them. Newspaper publishers, magazine publishers actually, for years they've been involved in eye tracking studies and trying to understand how do readers actually read their publication. They used to spend lots of money, and somebody would sit with their devices or would just tick off on a form which article was read, etc., etc. So when we, one of the best things I think that we've done as a company to the industry is that we've developed the real-time eye tracking studies on the content that we digitize for the publishers that we work with, and so we provided that to the editors, where it's very objective because the user has absolutely no way of influencing except by reading the publication on their tablet or on the computer or whatever else. And it would actually present the editor with a heat map to show, how the content was read. 85% of all the users who have read this particular issue have started reading article on page 3, but then you can see how they were dropping off. And so with a critical mass of users, the editors could make some conclusions, obviously over time, as to, what, this writer is really overpaid because nobody finishes his or her articles. There are some very interesting conclusions that we could drive out of that. We looked at it from a scientific standpoint. It's something that we just developed and we provided the publishers just an added value for them to understand how their printed content is being read digitally. One thing we looked at is that, well, the time that the users are spending, and then the time the users were spending reading the same content digitally was about the same. So it wasn't the snacky on the website. They were actually immersed in reading the content that we delivered to them. So that was great. But then the second thing we look at, and what pages are users looking at, left or right or left? How is that different between the printed edition and digital? It's not really different all that much. And then we looked at the advertising on pages. Well, how do the advertisers decide what pages to advertise on? I mean, there's got to be some sort of value associated. I mean, clearly there is page 1, there is the last page, and in the past the publishers were very reluctant on putting any advertising on page 1. That started changing over time. There's page 2, 3, great. Nobody would advertise on the crossword pages, and those were some of the most popular pages digitally. Right? And it was fascinating to us to see that, and so we presented these studies to the publishers, and it was all great. So now, how do you take this data and put it towards the content that still produces the bulk of the revenue, and that's the content that's published in print. And so you look at the Globe, and when they've done the redesign, which was now a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, they didn't just redesign the product. They didn't just shrink it and elongate it, but started printing it on glossy paper. But they also looked at how much content will they publish in a daily edition, and how much content they will publish in a Saturday edition. And so the daily edition became that sort of a snacking edition. You get a little bit here and there. It was still unique content, which is, I think, one of the more interesting values that the Globe delivers to their readers. Whereas the weekend edition became that deep analysis, even on the issues that have surfaced during the week. So that's something that they could use the studies that we've provided, as well as their own research in how to change the content that they publish. Now, as far as paywalls go, we were very much part of the very initial experiment with the Times of London when they were coming out with their paywall, and it was a very interesting experience because the original idea was great in the sense that they came to us and said, look, we decided we want to do this. We're the Times, we publish content. And it was going back to your point, it's no longer publishing the newspaper, but it is content that appears in all the different shapes and forms. And we have readers that follow our content and are paying for some of it and not paying for it. So we're going to go to our readers and say, we've published this content, you pay one fee, and then you get access to it in whichever form you want. We said, great. You know, and we were at the time doing their digital edition, and so the digital edition, which is a replica edition of the print edition, just published digitally, would be part of this paywall. Would be one of the features that would be that they would advertise to the readers. So they launched the paywall roughly about 18 months later, and for the first year, it's been a massive flop. And it was well publicized. They didn't really want to announce what the figures were, but through the analytics on the web, everybody knew what the figures were, and they were not good. And so, I mean, to their credit, they've done something very, forgive me for saying, but something ballsy, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's something that the industry really needed, a push towards, right, well, we need to find other ways of monetizing content. You know, it can't be free for all forever. But what the New York Times have done afterwards is they decided, right, we need a more porous approach to our paywall. We appreciate that there will be people who will get really tired of it. Continuous reminders that, look, you know, you're approaching your limit of 20 articles a month and you'll need to now subscribe. That people will get tired of deleting their cookies so they can start their whole 20 articles again. There will be people that will be tired of downloading plugins to their Firefox browsers so they can, you know, that automatically deletes their cookies. You know, all of these things that there is a certain percentage of readers who'll say, you know what, the New York Times is a brand of choice for me, and I'll pay the fee because, you know, they produce the content that is of value to me. And they've done a lot better than the Times have done. But what they also did very smartly, which the Times didn't do at the time, was that they truly aggregated all the delivery platforms within the same digital subscription. What the Times has done is they've taken their iPad app and said, right, well, you can get our content for one fee on everything but iPad, and for iPad you have to pay separately for the same content. And so that was their biggest mistake. We're seeing the New York Times approach taking on, and I'm not going to talk about the FT because the FT and Wall Street Journal, they have that unique content that people used to pay for, and that, you know, they're an anomaly. So how do smaller publishers take the New York Times example and apply it to their particular case? Well, the question always comes down to, well, how unique is my content? And is, say, well, we'll take, I don't know, a local newspaper, well, Richmond News, right? If I'm a publisher of the Richmond News, am I producing something unique that, you know, your blog is not going to produce on your own that is so, you know, as unique to the residents of Richmond? And is this something that can be monetized? There is a lot of free content out there. There's going to be a lot more free content out there. So we don't necessarily think that paywalls, paywalls will work for everyone. Right. I guess that's leading to the end of my tirade on this. But they will work for some. And it's not just about it's actually pretty much nothing about the presentation. It's more about the content and the uniqueness and the value that this content gives to people. But there's going to be a very prevalent audience that is disassociating itself from a brand. As we go, especially for the younger generation, they don't care for the Vancouver Sun, the province, the Wild, or whatever else. All they want is content that they need, that they long for, that they yearn at this particular point in time on the device of choice right now. And that's an interesting element because it's going to lead to more aggregation of content. Yeah. But that's a little bit further out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, do you have anything to add from this at this point from a Thinking Ape? Like, how do you guys handle, like, first of all, monetization, and then speak to that, I guess.
You're asking me all these questions about monetization.
Well,
like,
you know, and I know you're the, yeah, I know.
I'm kind of the anomaly on this.
Yeah, okay, well, let's switch channels. Christine, do you want to talk about this whole kind of paywall thing, or should we skip to...
Actually, this is the first I ever heard of paywall.
Really?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, interesting.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's move on to... Yep. We have a question? Excellent.
Sorry, I have a question. So while you're talking about different paywalls and ways of monetizing your content, I was wondering if any of you had any thoughts on the Next Issue app that Condé Nast and Hearst and Time and I think Meredith have all partnered with in the States, where it's a flat fee like Netflix and you get unlimited magazine downloads from select magazines?
So our company has produced a service called Press Display. PressDisplay.com was the online website that's been around for 9 years now, since 2003, and had a press reader app that was launched 2 years ago when iPad came out first. And from the very first day of Press Display, it was a single subscription, all content access type product, which at the time applied mostly to newspapers, although we've been adding more and more magazines to it lately, and it's something that we're going greatly into and going to aggregate a lot more content than just newspapers and magazines. It's an interesting concept in the sense that there is an expectation now that the user doesn't want to be entering into individual subscriptions, across all these different sites, and then they would rather pay one subscription, almost like you pay a single subscription for your cable, your phone, and your internet. So why not pay the same subscription for content? It's your daily news from Vancouver, it's your national news from Canada, it's national news, and then your personal hobby, your fishing, your gadgets, etc., etc. It's interesting that by and large, most publishers have been rejecting this concept for a while. We've struggled with Press Display to persuade the publishers that there is value in this concept going forward. Thankfully, we're winning now because more and more publishers are realizing this. In terms of magazines, I think it will be difficult because if you look at Condé Nast, their content is quite a bit different. Even if you throw Meredith content in there, you're still providing such a diverse content that's on the magazine side may not necessarily be of interest to me. Why would I subscribe to 10 or 12 magazines all at once when they're so different if I'm really just only interested in Condé Nast travel, for instance, right? So I think the bigger value is if they take that approach and start partnering with newspaper publishers, with news media publishers, but newspaper publishers, and sort of aggregate content overall, so they're not just singling themselves out. The same sort of approach, they were trying to implement the same thing in Spain and in France with their kiosks, and in Austria and a couple of others on a national level. And what we often find is that the editors can't agree on the fact that they would be selling themselves as one package. So, but that's bound to change.
An interesting thing there. I do a lot of research into file sharing and piracy, and certainly the idea that if you can get any money for a digital version of a magazine, you're doing well, right? Because it's available online. Any of the torrents, the pirate networks or whatever, certainly digital content is able to be shared.
I go back to the value concept, right? So the reality, the previous reality was the Vancouver Sun and maybe the province. That was it, right? If you wanted news, that's where you went, right? That was the bubble that you lived in. The bubble you live in today, and maybe soon enough we'll be reaching alien civilizations when they find planets with green bugs on it that read newspapers. But right now it's the planet, the entire planet. Your content competes with every other piece of content online on the planet. It's not uniqueness, it's value. You have to show a distinct value in your content compared to everything else on the planet. Now, it's kind of crazy. I'm putting a big bubble out there, but the brand is irrelevant. I think actually the Times, these paywall experiments, it's a case of arrogance. It's arrogance that the brand had such value. Well, they'll pay because we've got this big brand, we're famous, and they're going to pay to get our content. Not going to happen. There's so much good content out there You're competing with everybody on the planet. You have to own and be excellent at a unique content bubble. Giving content about Kitsilano, that's micro-focused, right? So previously what it was is you pay for an ad in the Vancouver Sun because you got all of BC pretty well, right? And you kind of hoped your ad crossed the path of one of your customers. What it's about now is understanding, owning, and delivering extreme value to a micro or a medium-sized group of users who could be around the planet, where an advertiser will come and say, you have connected in a meaningful way with that group, and I will associate my product, and I will pay you to make that association. And it may be that you don't even have a site. Your content could be fully distributed. You could be siteless, but your content is out there, your brand is out there, and people go, I know that brand, and that content's great, and it's relevant to me, and now there's this product associated with it. That's pretty cool. And maybe that content actually talks about the product, right? So it's about that micro audience with a high value content proposition related to it and a high relevant product or service related to it. This is the scary reality of all content. And I just came from CBC, and I grew up overseas. We listened to CBC radio. I mean, I watched every episode of the Beachcombers. I've been to, Molly's Reach and had the girl she say, I'm right in there. I'm all Canadian. I drink maple syrup in the morning. But the thing is that when I was at CBC, we kept running into this, and there was this well, it's the CBC, and the CBC brand is so powerful and awe-inspiring, and all Canadians bow down in front of it, and it's like they will pay for this. And I'm like, I don't think so. And there's something called a minimal viable product. And it's an interesting concept. And although CBC or other brands, maybe your brands as well, you think ours is so unique and special, if you go on the consumer side, they go, this other content's good enough. I won't go get the CBC or other big brand or brand-related content because this other content, which is free and readily available, is good enough for what I need. That is the market. And so you either compete broadly against the good enough, or you own unique high value against an audience. That is the sweet spot you have to go at.
Right.
So don't do paywalls, that's what I'm saying. So unless you want to make the news in a big flaming sort of story about paywall.
Yeah. So let's talk about how we create content. Let's turn it over to the writers. It's a battle as a content creator. Myself, I know it's a battle, and I don't even look at my analytics. Well, I do actually, but I pretend I don't while I'm looking at them and telling myself it's not happening.
It's good for your health.
Yeah, I guess Yeah. So, can you speak to that? I mean, in the context of what you're doing.
Well, like I said, I come from kind of a whole bunch of different backgrounds. Like I started in literary magazines, and then I moved to writing short pieces for the web, and then I moved to magazine, like print magazines, and then I landed the gig with Disney's Club Penguin. I kind of just applied for it as a fluke, and now I'm a game writer. So kind of, I think what works for me as a writer is kind of pulling from all of those different genres and going, what worked in this? Like, why do I want to read a novel? What about the novel is good? Taking that, pulling from it, and just taking the good bits and kind of shrinking it down and putting it into a game. So, I don't know, games for me are super exciting because it's like this uncharted territory. Yeah.
When you're writing, are you thinking of different devices on which it's going to be? Are you thinking of writing a game differently for an iPad, for example, as opposed to an iPhone, or even other types of medium?
Well, those two I kind of like lump in together because they're both kind of like, I have ADD and I want to read something quickly. So I try to keep that super short. Like, honestly, I will very rarely write something more than like 250 words. You don't ever want to go above that because at least with games, people want to get through to the action. They don't want to sit and read long form. Some people do. I love those people, but I don't get many of them. So yeah, it's kind of a battle to keep people's attention span. So it's a lot like the devices that I like in short stories, like a great simile or a strong metaphor, throwing that in and adding like pulp culture on top of it, just kind of a pastiche of all these different genres, and I kind of put it in and shorten it and make it work for games.
So you're working with the developers at the same time, right? You guys, do you map out the action and the narrative
It's a super small company, so the founders have more of like, they're the developers, so they're more the tech side of things. So they will go, here is this tech tree, we need this to work. Go figure out some story to fit onto it. So they were like, we need quests. Can you go and do quests? And so I was like, okay, well, let's make this area this, and then have some characters here, and make this interaction here. So basically taking what they have and making it shiny and fun.
Right, right. Christine, you are creating, you said, 1 story a day?
A minimum, yeah. It could be as high as 5 or 6.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly 1 or 2.
So, can you describe your process?
I actually have an editor who does most of the, who does pretty much all of the sourcing of content.
Right.
You know, I loathe to say this in this crowd, but we do have a mix of paid and free writers that write for us. And to be honest, that's the only way that the publication can exist, is to do that. Yeah, so a lot of it has to do, I mean, we go through editorial just like any other publication, proper publication should be going through editorial, which is to come up with, you know, what are the trends for the month, you know, maybe we should be doing something on Euro Cup and where families could be going in Vancouver to watch Euro Cup, right? That kind of stuff, but I think it's probably not really unusual. My background is in publishing. I have a degree from my senior from SFU. I did that too. I was an editor for 3 years and then made the leap to digital media. So it's not really that different, I think, than most people's process.
How open to spontaneity is your is the creation of your content? Like, do you map it out a week in advance?
It's pretty spontaneous.
Yeah.
I mean, like our I think, you know, we publish once a day, and if somebody wants to publish twice a day, you know, so we'll just add another article, right? So it's not we're not too rigid about it, I think.
And you touched very gently on the notion of paid and unpaid work. As someone who does a lot of unpaid work, I'm sensitive and appreciate you mentioning it. But you know, there are other things than cash or check or digital you know, deposit that you can give people. Talk about incentives.
Yeah, so we do have regular writers that I pay. I should say that first off, right?
Yep.
And you know, Vancouver Mom's been around now for almost 3 years, and I was actually at an event yesterday, and many people thought that the publication had been around much longer because it's been established. Among urban moms, it is, I mean, there's still a lot of work to go, but we were talking about brands, and it is becoming a recognized brand among urban moms. So a lot of moms, you know, we play in the space where there are mom bloggers, you know, and these mom bloggers, they want to become writers, and they are willing and happy to provide content to us because in the blogging world, it is very customary to provide guest posts to other blogs in order to get your blog established and recognized and get following and this sort of thing. So what they do get is the affiliation with the publication, that exposure. And then when there is a spot where I can pay somebody, they're like on the first on the list to be considered for that, right? Yeah.
Definitely. Nick, do you have any thoughts on, say, working with some of your clients, say perhaps even our friends at the CBC? How do you address the issue of creating content that people are going to A, care about, and B, share? Is sharing of content through the social media channels, is that a badge of honor and relevance? Or is that just something that is going to happen no matter what because I'm the CBC and my content gets shared?
I'm not sure if it's a badge of honor, it depends, but I guess, you know, I mean, from a tactical level, sharing content, enable it, right? One of the biggest sources of inbound information that most consumers today have is social media of some sort or another. It can be from the professional LinkedIns down to Pinterest and StumbleUpon or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Or even YouTube. YouTube is effectively a social network based on videos. People share videos somehow, right? So I think the really smart, successful sites that have value-added content, and I create content, micro niche content. Like if you want to talk about smart TVs, I can have a good chat about that. That's ultra micro niche. There's 10 people in Vancouver who'd like to talk to me about that. But so if you want to advertise against smart TVs, talk to me. But probably not. Anyway, but what you want to do is there's some, I don't understand it, where some people say, well, this is my content, you got to come here to read it, right? I would say, flip it 180 degrees. Basically enable people to post it, send it, share it, tweet it, mail it, yell it out, shout it out, pin it, whatever. Get it out there, right? If it's high value add, people will come across it, and ultimately they'll either share it on to other people, which extends your brand, adds the value, builds your customer target group. But then it'll also draw back in, because people will go, that was interesting. I've never heard of Thank You for Moms, but I'm going to go check it out, and you darn tootin' my wife's going to find out about it. Because we used to live in Kids, and now we live in the North Shore, miles and miles away. I'm sure my wife and my sister-in-law will be checking out Thank You for Moms tonight, right? Because that micro niche, very interesting content. I'm going to share it out to a bunch of people. Open the taps up, get it out there, spread the word. You can. There's nothing better than having great articles. It could be a micro niche article that suddenly goes viral. Suddenly, you're number one on YouTube, you're number one on Twitter. Like, for some reason, your story has resonated, and it's out there. You think that dead whale story is making its way around? It's all over Europe. People in Britain were yelling, "What's going on with your whales? You're killing off your whales in BC? What's going on?" I'm like, I had nothing to do with that whale. It's like, it gets out there, right? The whole, that story about the crazy guy in Montreal chopping people up, that is all over the planet. Canada is #1 for crazy people chopping people up, right? Not the best brand association, but because that spread, that's maybe not the best example, but that shows you how quickly social media can spread the story. If you have content, enable it, put up share buttons, let people tweet it, post it, do whatever the hell they want with it. Send it intergalactic if they can, right? Absolutely share your content. The only caveat being, remember, it's a big, crazy, scary place, and when you do get out in social media, think of the strategy. Once it gets out there, what are good ways to get people to come back? The simple things like taglines at the bottom, for more, come to our site, written by so-and-so, etc.
Okay, so let's, yeah, go ahead.
Can someone talk about Creative Commons?
CC? Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anybody want to field the Creative Commons? I can kind of field it. So Creative Commons is a way of, I was just talking with a woman named Martha Rands, who is one of the lawyers who started and instituted Creative Commons in Canada. And as she puts it, it's useless. Creative Commons is just an agreement where you're saying, hey, guess what? The content that you were going to share anyway, now we have an agreement that I'm allowing you to share it. I think that it has that utilizing a kind of a Creative Commons, there are different licenses for what you will allow people to do with your content. For instance, you're a photographer who uploads some stuff to Flickr, beautiful photo of Stanley Park or something like that, and you say, you can't share this, right? One license is no sharing, right? Not going to stop me from sharing. Another one might be the license share alike, non-commercial with attribution. And that would be you can share this, but only if you're the type of person who shares his or her own creative content. So we're kindred spirits. You have to attribute to me in the manner that I specify, meaning link out to my site, make sure my name's on it, post it on your blog, but make sure if people click the image, it goes to my site or my Flickr account, whatever, right? Share alike and attribution and non-commercial. So you can't use it on your website if you're selling tours of Stanley Park. You can't use my photo of Stanley Park to make money. So Creative Commons is a way of kind of creating an arrangement with all of those people out there who might be looking at your content, and having at least some sort of legality associated with it in case somebody does take your photo and make $1 million or something like that, or use it in a way that you totally find inappropriate, right?
But it has no. You're saying that the lawyer you spoke with says it doesn't.
Well, it's the internet. So I think that it's a good idea to have some sort of Creative Commons or copyright statement on your blogs or on your content if you are really concerned about sharing. But like the path of the law in these kinds of instances is long and expensive. And over an infinitely replicable file, which is what a photograph is or any of these things on the internet is, how far are you willing to go? If you're willing to go that far, well then Creative Commons will be helpful to you potentially if somebody does something with your content. But, it hasn't worked for Metallica. right? And they're the ones who are willing to sue people. They're one of the acts who is like, that's our content. And the internet says, yeah, whatever. You know, the internet doesn't know the difference between a Metallica song or your photograph or a scan of a shopping list that I created and emailed to my mom. It doesn't know the difference between those files.
It always struck me as kind of like a cool kid badge. Like you're in the know and you put it on and kind of like, I know what Creative Commons is.
Yeah.
And I'm cool with you remixing whatever I've put here.
And it's another way of communicating with people, right? If you, like, I think that, you know, that there's something to that. But it's not really a barrier to sharing. You know, people will do it anyway.
You know, I have an interesting experience, Sean, similar to
Yep.
I've run communications for a few different political candidates, and once we inadvertently grab a photo,
Sure.
Flickr,
Yep.
and this is the Creative Commons, and we started writing that photo, and the person contacted us,
Yep.
and rightfully so said, you know, I don't want you using this photo for a political campaign.
Yep.
And Creative Commons was there, and it totally worked. We really apologized, took it down, got rid of it.
Well, that's
sent him a thank you note.
Yeah.
An oversight, but it worked. It backed up that person's claim, saying, no, I don't want you using my photo.
See, and the good thing is that there was a conversation there, and it was a respectful conversation. I've had the same thing happen where I didn't attribute a photograph on a blog for a client, and the person sent me a terse email, right? But then you just respond and say, you know what, my fault, right? Take ownership, whatever happens, and then you know you comply, or you don't. At which point, then you know whatever happens, and you escalate it, or you don't. Or you write a blog post about that person and talk about how bad they are. Right? The internet's a weird place. Like there are many ways to skin a cat on the internet. But what I wanted to say, we wanted to wrap it up a little bit. How about just some final words, ideas, good thinking, advice? Christine, do you want to start?
Well, I was just thinking about your question about the editorial process. Mm-hmm. And who here is applying search engine optimization to their content that's online? Anybody here? Yeah, so just exposing, enhancing your content so that it's more searchable to and appealing to Google. When I was at Rogers, it was highly offensive to think this way, right? Like, because editorial, you cannot change editorial, even if it's an article that's no one's read for 10 years, right? Like, there was they were not having any of that. But I mean, one of the things that I do to get inspiration for article ideas is I look to see what Google already thinks we are all about, right? And in one case, it was party planning ideas in Vancouver. They seemed to think we were about that, even though we had written one article about that. And yet, so much traffic, we were getting so much traffic, and all we did was we created more content about that, and it's just,
oh, there you go.
Yeah, right, just more content with those words in it, and it's just bumped us up even more. So it's not that I was creating content that was not relevant to our users, because it was highly relevant to them, and it at the same time balanced out, you know, helped us in Google.
I think that it's important to be open to what the data is telling you.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Very good. Kate?
Yeah, we had that at Geist a little bit. Like, we would have titles that would reference a famous Canadian, or like in the actual magazine, we wouldn't even say his name in the title. But when you go to put that online, you have to say that guy's name. And it was kind of like, oh, is it artistic integrity? But you know, you have to be like, no, we need people to read this. Yeah. And then we would kind of put the other title underneath, so it's kind of, you know, everybody wins. It's nice. What are we talking about? We're talking about kind of like
just the final
SEO in general, or just
no, just advice
that
you think you're uniquely suited to. Yeah.
I think what we were talking about was like content. With me, when I first started, I was like, oh, I'm a serious writer. I'm only gonna write like hard journalism. I'm only gonna do short stories. And I think you can take that knowledge and you can take that style and you can put it into new media. And you can make it work really well. And it takes a lot of skill to do that kind of thing. Like, people will say, oh, it's just throwaway tweets, but it's actually very hard to craft, and I'm sure you guys know, to craft a really effective tweet. Mm-hmm. And so I think just keeping your mind open to the different disciplines and just talking to everyone. Like, that's why I'm here. I don't really know a lot about publishing, but I want to talk to everyone about it because it does affect what I do in the same way that what I do probably affects what you guys do, you know, so just kind of being open to that, I guess.
Great, Nikolay.
Mine would probably be based on how the gadgets, and gadget is probably becoming kind of a dirty word now, but how devices are changing the world, and how whereas you used to be a small magazine or a newspaper or a newsletter publisher or some sort of news content publisher in a small community before, you're now a publisher to the world. And your users can be in places you would never think they existed. But as much as somebody, you know, who lives now in the valley, still, but used to live in Kitsilano, wants to keep on all the kids' news, that's how it is with all content. And so I agree with you in terms of the paywall to a certain extent, that, you know, to lock up the content, to block the robots and everything off of your content is not the way forward. You need to use these devices to disseminate your content as much as possible. And thankfully, technology makes this very easy and actually very economical to do that. So.
Nick, final words.
I'm all out of crazy stuff, so...
more gloom.
More gloom, yeah, sorry. Let me, you know, I first of all, I think the video is going to be great with the soundtrack.
It's going to be awesome. And the dancing.
I hope my crazy comments shake you a little bit, make you think a bit differently. That's what I try and do. I go to the extreme, you know, parable. It's really crazy stuff to make me think. I'm going to just leave you with one thought. There's this great book. Please get it and read it. And it's super fun, too. It's a super fun book. It's called Exploiting Chaos. And it's written by this guy who runs a company called Trend Hunter in Toronto. And he's brilliant because he just looks at trends, lists them on his website, and then he wrote a book using all this stuff he collected. It was a brilliant use of his content. And it's basically, I don't know, 200 pages. And every chapter is simply 2 pages. Idea, description, comment, and then you're on to the next idea. It's a super quick read. It's awesome. And here's one idea I'm going to leave you with that I love. It's called boiling the frog. I don't know if you've heard this. So here's the idea, and I don't know if it's true, but it's a really cool story. So the idea is that if you get a pot of water, and it's cold, you put a frog in it, and you bring it up to boil, the frog will not jump out. It will boil to death because it doesn't notice. It doesn't notice. And suddenly it's like, oh, too late, I'm boiled, I'm dead, right? If you have a pot of boiling water and you throw a frog in, the frog goes, whoa, this is boiling water, jumps right out, right? Because the change is so sudden, you suddenly notice it, right? You are in a pot of water that is slowly coming to boil. Think about that. The world is changing around you. Your inclination is to hold on to your content. You should be giving it away. Figure out money to do that. You think you're a magazine? You're a content provider on this device, right? The world is rapidly changing. And think about companies like Kodak. They were cameras. They're gone. Think about Blockbuster. They were videos. They're gone. Think about all these other companies, billion-dollar companies that got boiled like a frog because they didn't sense the change. The world is changing. You have to look out there, open your eyes, read Exploiting Chaos. It's more even, you think I'm crazy. This is really crazy stuff. It's awesome read. Think about how the world is changing. Try interesting things. I was talking with a newspaper, whose name I won't mention, about strategy and ideas, and I said, you should give every customer you've got an iPad. Just give it to them. And then push the content to the iPad. Give it to them for free, and they will love you because you gave them an iPad. And then you'll push your content, and they'll use it for other stuff. Even brand your logo on top of it. I didn't get the job with them, but you know, anyway. But you know, it's like think crazy things in a space where the world is crazy, where everything is changing. You're right, these devices are changing the way we think. They're becoming ubiquitous, cheap, accessible. They're constantly connected. They're connected to the cloud where every piece of content is constantly available. Read Exploiting Chaos. It's super great read. You can, if you've got one of these, you can get it on Kindle as an ebook or print it out. And read about boiling the frog because we're all in the pot and the water's making. There you go.